idea. Welcome to tonight's Inland Northwest Guild meeting, and we're glad to see those that could make it, and others will be able to see this recording in the future, so we'll just kind of keep everything handy for them. And everybody's going to chime in and tell you their thoughts and ideas and argue with me and, you know, the normal stuff. So we appreciate your paying attention to everything and enjoying it. You can always email Linda the writer at gmail.com if you have to say something to me about this, but keep it nice because I don't want to be offended. You know, nobody wants to be offended, least of all me. Anyway, tonight's topic is historical fiction. What the heck is it anyway? And I named it that because it's one of those genres that is so sort of floats all over the place. People don't agree on what it means. They have different ideas about it, although there are similarities between the different organizations and what they say. And I did do a little thing here that I can just read off of. You don't have to stare at it unless you want me to put it on screen. It's just some text, and it's a synopsis of what I put on a large document that I am happy to send you, from which I have excerpted a number of great ideas and concepts and descriptions and things from several sources and put that in that document. So it'll be a good one if you do want to see it. But I've also pulled bits of it for this one that I will be reading from. Oh my goodness, Charisse. Heavens, I haven't seen Charisse for ages. Let's get her in here. Charisse, welcome. I'm so happy to see you. I haven't seen you for ages. I may not see you tonight. It looks like you're covered up, but at least maybe I can hear from you, right? Are you able to talk? No? Well, we're recording and we'll keep going here then. Tonight's topic is historical fiction. What the heck is it anyway? And I did pull some nice definitions. I don't know if I should try to embarrass anyone by first having you tell me what you think historical fiction is. Is that a good way to go? Or do you want me to leave it? I'll just tell you what everybody says, and then you can say, "Oh yeah, that's what I think it is." But that'll be more, you know, less embarrassing, right? Okay. Steve writes historical fiction, so. Now, I went to one of the outfits online, is the Self-Publishing School, and they're really good. They've got some good articles and things. And their definition says, historical fiction is fiction that takes place in some specific era of the past. The events and characters might not have literally happened, but they're rooted in the time period. In other words, well, they didn't actually happen, they could have happened. They fit, okay? This is how historical fiction works. The setting is grounded in historical accuracy, but it isn't literally real. Downton Abbey, for example, is based on a family that existed, but Mary Crawley never did, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop and ask any comments on that. Is that surprising at all, or?
Not at all. I always thought Louis L'Amour books were kind of like historical fiction because he always tried to make real maps of real places and everything else.
Yeah.
Stories were not real.
It's yeah, he wrote about a particular era time in history with a lot of Western characters, Western type. Oh, we get to see Kalela now. She must have finished eating. Okay. Then I went to master class. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with that. I pay for that every year, and I go to tons of things. And they had something that was under Margaret Atwood, kind of associated with her class. And their explanation is that historical fiction is a literary genre where the story takes place in the past, surprise, Historical novels capture the details of the time period as accurately as possible for authenticity, including social norms, manners, customs, and traditions. Many novels in this genre tell fictional stories that involve actual historical figures or historical events. Now, that's a little bit, it's similar to what they said in the first one, but it's a little bit different, gives a little more detail. I like that and one of the things that they have said is that, of course, writing good historical fiction requires research. I can't remember if I don't know if I got that here. I didn't. One of them said that basically this should be, one of them said that historical fiction would take place at least 50 years ago. Okay. The basic idea was that the person writing it would not have lived in that period. So they would have to do a lot of research. And so it requires that kind of skill. You don't just sit there and say, oh, I think I'll write about history. I want to write about Cleopatra and I'll just make something up. And it's Cleopatra and she's the queen of Egypt and all that. Oh my goodness, did Herbert get his plumbing fixed? Possible. I'm sharing everybody's stuff here tonight on this recording. Okay, and then I went to Celadon Books. They do a lot of wonderful historical novels, and I do some reviews for them. I think their stuff is generally very, very good. And they said, historical fiction is one of those subgenres of literature that takes many forms. Its most important feature, though, is that it's set in the past with every element of the story conforming to the norms of the day. Here's how we define historical fiction, a look at its origins and some popular types. Historical fiction is a story that takes readers to a time and place in the past. How far back in time does an author have to go for their work to be considered historical fiction? A good rule of thumb is a minimum of 50 years. The idea is to take readers out of the events of their lifetime. Most book lovers agree that historical fiction is the closest we'll get to actual time travel. Interesting way to put that. We'll actually travel in time. So it's supposed to be that realistic. They picked a figure of 50 years ago. Doesn't, one of the things that people in all the different organizations sort of disagreed with was whether or not something was truly historical based on any given thing. And it was interesting because he pointed out that a lot of people, for instance, read Jane Austen as though they consider it historical fiction. And it is, and yet at the time she wrote it, it was not historical fiction. It was contemporary fiction. Isn't that kind of neat? It's like
yeah, I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, it becomes historical when the author's gone. I'm longer in that. Here are the 5 common elements. I'm gonna stop first here and half because I like to give people an opportunity to jabber at me, and I don't like sitting here just talking away. Any thoughts on any of this so far?
So what it means to make your book historical, you have to kill off the author then?
I hope not.
Well, if you were to write a book about now, day, then we couldn't call it historical fiction 20 years from now. It'd still be contemporary, in other words. But I thought that was interesting. That means most of the historical fiction that we think of that falls in the category of classics, is that's historical fiction, but only, of course, if the author was writing things accurately. Now, theoretically, if you lived in the time period, you'd be able to pull that off without a lot of extra work. But Who knows?
Yeah.
Ooh, I like your cat thing up there, Kalila, in the corner, your kitty cat. That's cool. Okay, well, let's get down to the last bit of this for now. Anyway, Celadon book says that there are 5 major things that are involved in a good, accurate historical fiction. The setting says the setting is the most important part of historical fiction novel. It should take place during an authentic period in history and be set in a real historical place. For example, New York City during the Great Depression or Paris, France during World War II. Then, plot. The plot in a historical fiction novel is a combination of real events and fictional events. You can invent characters, cities, and events, but they still must make sense the time period. For example, a novel set in London, England, in 1666 would benefit from incorporating the Great Fire of London, a major turning point in the city's history. Okay, so far?
Mhm.
Then characters. The character can be real, fictional, or both, but they should all look, speak, and act in ways that accurately reflect the era. For example, if you're writing a book about Mary Tudor, it shouldn't disregard or reinvent her family history as the daughter of Henry VIII and sister to Elizabeth I, who both played an important role in Mary's reign. You don't go just willy-nilly, changing bits and pieces of stuff. Dialogue must be authentic to the time period and should reflect the status of the characters who are speaking. For example, British soldiers in a Revolutionary War wouldn't use Western slang of today. I think in the various things that I've reviewed or looked at for authors over the years, that's one of the things that stands out, because people will use dialogue that's just not right. And it's interesting because they may have designed their whole novel, the historical novel, around really good information, really good data, and then they throw in this dialogue that's just wrong. Modern street language, no, they didn't have that then. So usually a lot of research can help with that kind of problem. And then finally,
Yeah, that's what our part of the issue right now. That's the issue I'm having right now, because you got to remember how people spoke back in the 1850s or 60s, how it sounded to them, or how they
we can't
how it
get Jerry.
was, how they perceived.
Your parrot's gone wacko on. He's got a lot to say about historical fiction, I think.
Anyway, the main emphasis of dialogue is that it changes year from era to era, and unless you are aware of how things were spoken at that time, you really have no idea, and you're just kind of guessing more than anything else.
Yeah, the one thing that you can do is read, go into and read historical documents from the time period, because they will have the kind of language and information that you can use. So you can go to like the contact the Smithsonian or the National Library and things like that, and access their documents from that period of time. And that's a good way to get the language. You can also, sometimes in biographies, if you can isolate an individual from that time period that someone's written a biography about, frequently in those, they will contain letters, verbatim letters that person wrote, or some other document. And then you can get that, and that will help you with the dialogue. But it's one of those things that's extremely jarring to be reading along, and suddenly there's this line, you just go, what? No, this isn't right. So try not to do that simply because it jars the reader. And Sharice is coming back. She was here, but I think she had that.
Yeah, there she goes.
Yeah. And then finally, conflict. The problems the characters encounter should be conflicts people of that era would encounter. For example, your book might describe the hesitation and fear German soldier feels as he is sent to the Eastern Front, where he knows he is likely to die. Okay, so you could deal with the characters and what they go through. If, for instance, if this is ridiculous, of course you wouldn't do this unless you were doing an alternative history, but you wouldn't have a character having a conflict because their car broke down on their way to Versailles when they were to meet with the king and queen, you know, because they didn't have cars. But you might have a breakdown of their carriage if they had a horse-drawn carriage. So any kind of that and any other kind of conflict, you're not likely going to see the same kind of conflict over a bad relationship that you would see in modern times. In other words, the way it's handled wouldn't be the same. So even there, you may be dealing with an abusive spouse, one or the other, who abuses the other, and that's a real thing that happened then. But it isn't going to feel and sound the same to the reader. It shouldn't anyway. Right?
You know, that reminds me of when, as a 20-year-old, I saw South Pacific for the very first time.
Mhm.
And Nellie and that other guy, I've lost his name, you know, the Frenchman who had dark skin colored kids because he'd been married to a native. And when
Mhm.
she found out that her lover had children who were mixed race, she fled crying because it was impossible to be married to him. And I remember sitting there watching that, and I guess I was about 16 at the time. I was home, and I looked over at my mom and dad and said, "What the heck was that about?" It made no sense whatsoever. But
Uh-huh.
back during World War II, that made plenty of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there are some things that happen in historical fiction that will kind of stop you. It's like, what? You know, and then you think, yeah, I guess it would be like that. You know, people in historical periods are gonna look at things like certain kinds of diseases differently, or, you know, things that we don't even think about anymore were great threats to people at a certain time. So there are, you know, one of the things that happened with this, I'm going to see if I can share that other document because I want you to see a list. Here we go. This one, and I'm going to skip all the verbiage because a lot of that is the same, but here is from the Historical Novel Society. It's one of the groups that I went in and stole from some little bits and pieces. I don't think they mind because I took little bits and I'm telling you about them and it'll be their promotion. So they also consider these sort of subgenres as being, you know, still within the historical fiction. Alternate history, okay, because what you're basically doing is changing an outcome of something like World War II. Not so much you're still writing about the people and the way it was then, but you're saying, what if it had gone this way? And how would events occur? Would there be an election? Would there not? Would there be people arrested off the streets and things like that? So, but still, it would be accurate as to the way people react to the situations and all that. Pseudo histories is a made-up history of a country or an island, like in this case, Umberto's island of the day before. Now, that's a little bit farther away because he's totally making this up. Not this history never occurred, but still he's trying to place it in a time frame that has certain kinds of people, certain experiences, things of certain cultural aspects that are going to be there, and he wants to be accurate to that. Time slip novels are novels which, you know, you're reading along and they're talking about this, and all of a sudden you flip to a different time frame. Both time frames should be accurate within themselves. Now, we wouldn't normally flip. We wouldn't experience going from one time frame to another. However, both of them are theoretically a part of real history, have their own cultures, have their people and stuff, and are responsive. They still consider them part of historical fiction. Historical fantasy, like King Arthur trilogy, there you have fictional characters, but they're based on what people think were people who actually existed. And again, the time frame is got a certain kind of cultural feel to it, a certain kind of language, so the characters want to be true to form. Multiple time novels, and that's the hours. So again, you've got several different times involved. But these are their subcategories that they listed. So you could read what's on their site, and you can have access to this link if you want it. But it's just, let's see, what is it? The historical novels, the historical novel society.org. And I found it fascinating. They've got book reviews that they've done, people have done of these different books. And they fall into different categories. So you can look up all these different subgenres. If historical fiction is subgenre, then these are subgenres of that subgenre. And I don't know if you can see them, but they're adventure, alternate history, biographical fiction, children and young adult areas, epic, historical fantasy, inspirational romance, literary, military, mystery, crime, nautical, and we don't have Dave with us here tonight, but he's done nautical things, fiction, romance, saga, short stories, thrillers, time slip, and westerns. You were talking about earlier about one of our great western writers. So, and I'm going to close this back up. We don't really need it. Again, that's the long document that you can have me send to you if you want it. So,
What is time slip?
Pardon?
What is time slip?
Well, my best understanding of time slip is that you are in a particular time, but maybe the person, maybe the character is suddenly remembering a different time. In other words, it's not time travel, but within the narrative, you're moving from one time period to another. That makes sense. That's my understanding.
That list just about encapsulates everything.
Well, it can. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that. A little more comment?
It's a pretty comprehensive list.
Yes, it is. And they're basically saying that within each of these, you want to be looking at the main thing, which are the setting, as we discussed earlier here. Had that one up. The setting, the plot, the characters, the dialogue, and the conflict. So those are the elements that you want to try to fit to a particular era. You can with some of them, like with fantasy, for instance, you can make up a place and a thing, but typically people will try to set it in something that's sort of historical to our own reality. But they'll just add elements to it that makes it not strict. Because this historical fiction is meant to be historical, to follow certain guidelines with regard to being historical, but at the same time be fiction, which means that certain things can be made up and added to the mix. Okay? And in a way, that's not agreed on by everybody, all the organizations, but it is technically a fact, and it's one of the reasons why you will see historical fiction doesn't have its own category in most bookstores, because historical fiction can be found in all these different subgenres. Okay? If you are for want of a better word, a nitpicker, if you are there's a good word for that. Perfectionist? No, that's not right. What's the word I want, dang? Purist, that's it. If you are a purist, then you would say, I'm sorry, only fiction based on our history that we know and all that. That's the only kind of historical fiction that I will accept. And, on one level, you're absolutely right in doing that. However, when it comes to recognizing viable genres in which you may be able to write and make money, then looking at some of these subgenres is important, because there are people who love to read historical. They love to read things that take place in the past, but they want these other elements. They want romance, or they want, world war kind of stuff, or adventure stories. Or I'm thinking of things like the Three Musketeers. Now, to me, the Three Musketeers is historical fiction, but because it takes place at a certain time in French history, and it involves certain. Is it French or British? Yeah, it's French, because it's Louis and all those people.
Mhm.
So it's French history, but at the same time, it's really leans heavily on swashbuckling, which is, yeah. Oh, thank you, Cherie. She put a little thing there that said French. Yes. And The Count of Monte Cristo, for instance, one of my favorite all-time novels. It's historical fiction, but it's not. I don't think it's based on the real people. Okay, so technically, it's not historical fiction, because these people didn't exist. Well, on another note, they could have. Okay, so that's one of the other leeways you have is, could they have existed in that time period? Would they be believable for them? So, and I've got Jerry yawning now, so I better, stop yapping and see if we can open it for any kind of general discussion.
Mhm.
Well, it certainly would be nice if there was a better and more clear definition. Over here in Spokane, as you know, they're putting in these traffic circles everywhere. And they bother me, because I like an absolute red or an absolute green. Is it my turn or isn't it? And traffic circles are just giant round ambiguities. And I find that the definition of historical fiction seems to be about the same. The same thing with genre. I write love stories. They don't really fit perfectly in women's fiction or romance, although they're closer to romance. But still, when I try to get an exact understanding of every genre so I can figure out exactly where my books go, I get 15 different explanations from 15 different people. Nobody really knows exactly what the genre is.
About the only way you can pin it down is because you look at it and you say, okay, fiction is the main category. Romance is a subcategory. But if you go to the BISOC, remember we had the BISOC connection that Eric brought up and I was talking about. It's the official, it's huge. It's huge. So if you go in there and you look under fiction and then you look under historical fiction, it will show you all the different things. If you look up romance under fiction, it will show you all the different kinds of romance because there is more than one kind of romance.
I need to look up BISOC.
BISOC, yeah, BISOC. And Dan, I can send you, I'm trying to think if I've got some of it here, just a second. No, I'll stay with me for a minute and let me see if I can find that document on my, whoops, screen share. Okay. That's not going to do me any good right this minute because it's covered up. So let me open it. Hang on. Here are the BISOC. Writer stuff. I've got so much stuff on my screen. It's a wonder I can find anything. Do it by.
Well, genres, it's kind of like a whole bunch of circles on a Venn diagram. Your whatever you're writing can probably fit in 6 or 7 genres, and
Yeah.
you just have to pick out the ones you're going to be aiming your clients at.
Mm-hmm. Or your audience, yeah. You know.
Yeah.
Well, ooh, BISAC. Here we go. Okay, I've got her up. Now let me. Okay, let me go back. It's a document that I made up, and it doesn't have everything, but it has quite a bit. So I'm going to go back to share screen and to do this one. Okay, it talks about fiction and all. And then we get down here. Okay, here's the BISAC categories are just all these numbers. Okay. You've got different kinds of fiction. And if you go down here, let's see if we can find, okay, romance. There's Christian romance historical. That's one of the things. It's actually got its own number. Christian romance historical. Christian romance suspense. Okay, so I'm going down and I'm in the C's because it cross-references, whoops, erotica. What is that? Okay. Let's see if I can find romance down here. Historical fantasy, historical medieval, historical renaissance, mystery detective.
Prehistoric.
Yeah.
No, Clan of the Cave Bears.
Yeah. Okay. Romance, psychological, romance general. That's your main subgenre. Romance general. Under that, you can have romance action and adventure, African American and Black, billionaires. Believe it or not, billionaires have their own thing. Christian romance, romance clean and wholesome, romance collections and anthologies, contemporary, erotic, fantasy, firefighters. We got
It's got its own.
firefighters, historical general, historical American, historical ancient world, Gilded Age, medieval, Regency, Renaissance, Scottish, Tudor, you know, it just goes on and on. I mean, romance international, romance holiday, and why is that? Okay. The reason for that is because publishers know that they're looking at a wide audience of people, and they want to aim their book at the right people. So they market them that way. And there are people, believe it or not, that all they like, they want to go to the Renaissance period and they want their romance to be taking place there and people are poisoning each other and all that kind of stuff. Or they want to go to the medieval period and that's where the romance is. So what you have to decide for whatever you're writing, if you're writing romance, is does it take place in a historical time or in current time? And if it's in current time, is there some sort of theme in it that stands out? Like, are you writing erotica or are you writing pure, you know, sort of gentle sort of romance? Okay. And if you aim, you need to know your romance subgenre as well as you can, because if you pitch this to a publisher or someone, you need to be able to tell them what subgenre it's in. Because if you don't, and you just say, I'm writing a romance novel, well, they're going to come back and say, well, shoot, oh dear, there's tons of people writing romance novels. You know, why would we? But if you've gone to if you've done your research on that subgenre and found out that, oh, there's these authors that write that, and this is what their books are like, and mine's just like that, then you're able to say, I write for this subgenre. That makes sense?
Yes, that whole little bit was worth the cost of admission.
There you go. All right.
I guess the moral is bodice ripper isn't enough.
And the what and the who?
Bodice ripper is not enough.
No, it's not, because in some places the man is putting the bodice back on the lady, covering her up because he's nice. I mean, our romance section is so funny at the store because we've got everything from these hunk, you know, supposedly, I don't consider them hunks, but evidently somebody does. And they, you know, here's the girl and she's, oh, looking up at him. And other times the girl is like, like that, you know, and so it just, and it appeals to different readers. Okay.
Yeah.
For the bodice ripper, because I do read a lot of historical fiction.
Mhm.
There's one author who specializes in bodice rippers, but they're bodice rippers, medieval fairies of Ireland. You know, so there's like this really long string of things that go with it. So, you know, for new adult medieval fairies, Ireland bodice ripper, you know, that's like 5 things. And she has a huge following.
Steven.
Yeah, I've been, the last 4 books I've written have been historical fiction. And I happen to be a member of the Historical Novel Society, number 6223. And mine is all placed in around 600 BC in ancient Greece, Egypt, Nubia, and points east and west. I have one character that is in all 4 books, who is a real character. That's Sappho, the poet and philosopher from the island of Lesbos. And the events involving her in the film or in the books are, to the best of my ability, representative of what little they know about that particular person. The rest of the characters are fictional characters, but very carefully researched in terms of where they are. And I guess it could be considered nautical by virtue of the fact that the vast majority of the time they're engaged in maritime trade, so they're actually on board ships. And
Mhm.
and Linda, you've read the last one, and so you know what I'm talking about there. But I taught classical mythology over a 4-decade period of time, and was pretty comfortable with the Greek side of things, but had to do a lot of research on Egypt and Nubia. And I'm planning at this point to start a new set that'll be based in Egypt, because I've become kind of fascinated with that whole thing. But yeah, historical fiction is based in the fact that I try to stay with the customs and traditions and actual lifestyle of those peoples. The one thing that's not accurate is that these are Greeks speaking Greek language, and Demotic and other languages that are being used by the peoples in the stories. But it's all written in English. But I've had to, in editing, I had to go through very carefully and really redo anything that sounded too modern. And I had to be careful of certain words. And my critique group helped me a lot with that, in terms of words that carried a sense of presence for current times. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges in editing.
Yeah, like you don't have them yelling, "Stop, police!" You know,
Nope.
what do you have them to stop? Roman soldiers? No. Or stop, gendarmes? No.
And
Arrêtez.
there's a healthy dose of mythology across all 4 books. And that also makes it historical, because these are the stories that were told by the sailors and soldiers, and later the professional bards of those ancient times.
You bring up an interesting point. The words we use, a recent change in our language, which I haven't yet caught on to, is calling an individual them, plural. And I've seen that showing up out of the mouths of 4th century soldiers. And it kind of jars me when I see that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you almost have to look up, try to find when the term first came into use, and then you know, make sure you're not using it if it's not appropriate for that time period. You're looking awesome.
Sometimes when you're doing the research on particularly on those ancient times, there's a good deal of too much information, because there's a good deal about that I really didn't want to know.
Yeah. Did they have any terms that you ran into that fit some of the gender issues at the time?
Gender equity is one of my major themes in all of my books.
Mhm.
Yes, there are not so much terms, but there were certain customs and regulations, even laws around gender, particularly that in Greece, women really had less legal standing than cows.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, there was a great deal of that. I mean, male dominance in our society comes honestly from the Greco-Roman experience.
Well, it's all been so much a part of most history, with some exceptions, and those exceptions are really standouts. I mean, if you look at some of the different parts of history, different groups of people where maybe matriarchal societies were the standard. And so, you know, if you're going to be talking about any culture of a certain time period, we want to be certain to be accurate in terms of who we say lived then, how they lived, and all of that. Because if the thing is we can write a book and think, oh, well, nobody's really going to know whether this is this or that. However, if you have touted yourself as a particular of a historical fiction novelist of a particular time and culture, remember your vast number of readers are going to be people who are already familiar with that, and they're going to know. So if they're reading along and you blow it, they're going to be very aware that you blew it. And so it isn't a matter of, oh, they won't notice. Some readers won't, but a lot of your readers probably will.
It's interesting your comment about the matriarchy, because that's actually what drove the Greeks to their extreme position of male dominance. Their own myths speak of a time when women had the vote, and how it was that it was taken away. But it is my opinion in my research that the matriarchal society that the Greeks who moved into the area had to absorb, that drove them to an extreme male dominance position, because they were actually absorbing a matriarchal society, an agricultural food gathering society, as opposed to the hunter society that the Greeks were. And so that's probably what drove them to their extreme male dominant position.
Yeah, I think even in modern times we see people, if they feel threatened, then groups of people will come up with their own sort of ideas about what they think's going on and what ought to be done and all of that. So.
Well, I actually had the opposite problem because my book is also set historically. And I had a reviewer actually say that the book should be tossed because I used the word whore. And in a time period where people worshiped goddesses, nobody would dare use the word whore. And I was like, yeah, well, that's stupid. So it doesn't matter, I think that you're going to get fallout from reviewers no matter what you put on the page.
Yeah.
Or how accurate you try to be.
And it's quite possible that the whores of that time would be men, except I think in the Bible, didn't they talk about the male sex workers that called them dogs?
Yep. There were many religions that had male sex workers in their pagan temples.
Mm-hmm.
It was a couple.
I think part of the problem is when you're talking across different languages, because I don't really know that there's a direct relationship of the modern term whore with the sacred prostitutes of the temple of Aphrodite, for instance. And they were very often referred to in transliteration as sacred whores. So, I would take issue with that. Reviewers aren't always right on. There was a game that came out called Wrath of the Gods, and it was about Greek mythology, and anything Greek mythology I got into, and I played the game, and I was so impressed with it because it allowed for play through all the different variations of the myths, yet it was reviewed and panned because it wasn't accurate to the myths. Well, the reviewer was simply showing that they did not have a full understanding of the myths because there are multiple versions of each of these myths. And so I did write a letter to the company that had prepared the game and said, I saw the review, I disagree, and I wound up I told them I was teaching and I was using it in class actually, and they said, well, we've heard from a number of professors and stuff that do that, so we're considering making an educational version of the game where you'll be able to isolate the hero to a specific myth, etc. And then they sent me a package that included all of that. But I'm a little careful of reviewers, and in case that's the comment around the whore thing, I'd be a little suspect of that particular reviewer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and again, always if someone is critiquing your work or suggesting changes or any of that. I think it's always important to look at the thing and figure out exactly, you know, well, what is this based on, and have I made sure that this is sound? And just remember, at the end of the day, it's going to be your readers. Are they going to laugh at what you've done and throw it across the room and say, brother, I'm never going to read that again? Or are they going to read it and say, well, you know, I'm not sure about all this, but this is really good. I like this. And I think this author is fairly accurate, and they're certainly writing my taste. And because that's really what you're, as someone who wants, you know, there's a difference between receiving literary kudos. Now, this would be people that are going after Pulitzers and other major awards, and they're in the literary world. They must be very accurate. Their characterizations should be, they're usually respected because of the way they've written their people. The people are realistic, they're believable, they are people that the readers can empathize with, and they've dug down into these people and the time period that they lived in, and they've tried to become very careful about how they display those characters, not because of criticism, because they're really trying to develop a good work of fiction, a high quality work of fiction. So, you know, and what is that? Well, everybody argues about what they think is literary and what isn't, and that's personal, you know, that's just a subjective decision that people make. But if you're actually trying to fit into that market and trying to be appreciated by literary reviewers, then it will matter more. See?
Well, the only metric of goodness or badness is, does it sell? And
Yeah.
inaccuracies are a tool. Picking up, making your primary character a female doctor in 1804 is violating the standards. But if you're aiming to sell books to liberated women nowadays, that would be a very good trick to use. So you adjust what you're writing to who you want to sell to.
And I've read some very accurate novels about women physicians in history.
Yeah.
And they, yeah, you know, probably some of them you've seen, and they were real in many cases. So the fictionalized story is based on them. They frequently had to jump through hoops in order to do any kind of practice. There's one that I loved. I can't think of the title of it, but it's a series of mysteries, and it's about it's not somebody I think that really lived, but because of the school, and you can help me out, Steve. I think you might know this. It's one of the places in, I think, the 1100s where they actually taught women, somewhere in Italy, I think. And
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I'll try to find that for everybody, but my God, was it wonderful. But they asked, the King of England asked them to recommend, and maybe it was in Turkey, not sure, but recommend somebody that should come and solve this medical crime, do something with it. And they sent her. She had to go, though, as not really being a doctor. She went as the assistant to a black man who was touted as being the doctor, but supposedly couldn't speak English. Therefore, she had to translate, so she would be right there with him and say things like, he says that this and this and this. Well, actually, it was her saying what was the case, but they made it look like it was him because he was acceptable and she was not. She could not be a physician in England. She could have gotten strung up for that. So there's ways you can deal with these things, but the fact that the school taught women and had physicians come out of it was true. Okay, that actually happened. And so she took something from history, the author did, and placed it in a fictionalized story and gave, made the whole story up, but it was based on reality. So, and that's a case of historical fiction, and the king was real. The king was who he was, and the country when they went to England was the country where she was from, and the country that she went to. Everything was real as it was then, and she carried out this very good job of describing the people, the culture, and all of that as she went. And but at the same time, so it was historical fiction, but it was mystery. It falls under the mystery genre. That's where you find it in the stores. So it was fascinating, and I happen to love mystery, so I'm a fan. Anyway, any other thoughts before we lose Jerry? You keep yawning, so I'm looking at you going, oh my God, you're going to start me yawning. And, there's always these arguments, or these positions that can be taken where we say, well, that's too strict, or that's not strict enough, or, I just want to write what I want to write, and I think people will love it. And, I mean, there's all that goes on. But like Paul mentioned earlier, in some ways, all that matters is, does it sell? Now, different publishers specialize in different levels of writing quality. I can tell you that. If it's a Knopf book, KNOPF, it's going to be high caliber. And by that, I mean that the writing is exceptionally good. It's not over the top. Wow, this has happened. It's not pushing people's buttons. It's just a good, well-written story with very strong, believable characters that fit the time period, even if whether it's current or past. And it's obvious. And many of these books have taken the authors 5, 10, 15, 20 years to write, because that's how long it took them to do the amount of research that was needed to, and then put it together in a package. So it's not, I will tell you right up front, I cannot write literary fiction. I am not that good. I just can't do it. But I can write fun stories, and I can write, fun mysteries and things like that. But there's no way I could write literary fiction. And some authors who do literary fiction are nice people. Some of them are egotistical, blankety blanks, but you find that in anything. You find that in any career, any, any part of society. You find egotistical people and nice people, and or people that love themselves too much, when it's narcissists or what have you. But that's just normal. That's across, everything. So we shouldn't be surprised if it occurs in writing as well as other areas of life. Any other ideas?
As far as genres are concerned, if I were writing those kinds of books, I would just pick the one that the publisher is satisfied with, but I'd use keywords, including every one that it might apply. Because if somebody's looking for a book that isn't of the particular genre that you've written or that you've chosen, if it's similar, I mean, maybe it isn't exactly the right one. There's somebody who wants something just a little bit different, and they might look at your book and like it.
You mean encourage to get a publisher to take it on?
No, I'm just saying, the publisher's going to insist you choose genre. However, in your marketing, you include keywords for every genre that might apply,
You
so
can
that
do
people,
your own marketing, right?
yeah,
Well, the point of the BISAC code is to help bookstores know where to shelve your book. So you're going to want your top code to be whatever you want your book to be shelved next to.
That's a
You know,
good point.
Except that the top code is fiction. Half the store is fiction. And it's broken down into mysteries and horror and science fiction and fantasy and, you know, and romance. So you can't just say it's fiction. And that's
right,
what
but that's not my top code. I mean, when you
oh,
go
so you're not
into your
talking about
metadata,
BISAC, yeah.
it'll say, you know, Celtic family history saga or something. You know, you have a string and that's what you put at top. And then underneath that, you might put sword and sorcery or action and adventure or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you meant the BISAC codes. And they're, yeah, they're very limited when it comes to the top. Fiction, nonfiction, crime.
but if somebody's looking for something similar, but not exactly the one that you've chosen as your primary identifier, then you ought to try to attract them in, other people in, to look at your book. It might just be what they like. It might be the overlap in the Venn diagram.
Yeah, pretty much you're looking at simply the secondary level though. The first subgenre. I mean, fiction is a subgenre already of God knows what. But anyway, it's already there as one of the categories. Under that, you get all these others. And in most cases, the first level under fiction is where you're aiming at in terms of bookstores. They don't break it down any farther, much. There's a few exceptions, for primarily in nonfiction. You'll have nonfiction broken down into, well, again, that's still at the secondary level. You're looking at religion, American history, you know, things like that. So,
But if I'm looking for a book, I might check online and find out what it is,
mhm,
and then run down to Auntie's, 800 miles or 400 miles away,
uh-huh.
and get it. But if I'm looking online, I'd like to see a lot of variety there and a lot of choices from
Sure.
which to choose.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I know what you mean. Um, and again, it depends on who's doing the marketing and whether or not they've, you know, I mean, how it's marketed. Are there sites that you go to that are much more careful about the BISAC? I'm not saying this is a BISAC code, but being careful to delineate those different. Because I know when we order books on Edelweiss for the store, when we go in and place our big orders for the publishers, each book is really broken down. It'll have categories. It has fiction, and then it'll say family, or it may say so it'll list several different subcategories. So we as buyers recognize that there's several categories for this book. Again, it's probably going to go in the fiction, the huge big fiction section, unless it does fall in some subgenre that we separate. And every bookstore will be different. The libraries are different. So you're never going to have a situation where it's 100% the same. I mean, we don't get out the BISAC codes and try to figure out where to put a book. We code it when we buy it based on where we think we're going to stick it in the store, and we code it that way. And so when the label comes on, when they're received and the labels are printed out that we've received it, it'll have that name on that code on the label. So if you ever look at the back of books and their store labels, you can see category it's been put under, whether it says history or American, because that's how we know where to shelve them. So the staff then read the label and go, oh, this goes in American history, or this goes in, religion, Western religion, or this, whatever. So, but that's a decision that's kind of made by the buyer when they will select a code that they want to use. Sometimes the codes that the publisher are telling us it should be, for instance, biographies. They will come out and they say, okay, this is a biography. And we go, no, I'm going to put this in Black history. Or I'm going to put this in Native American history. Or this is going to go in Western. Because it's about somebody that fits those categories. And we know that customers are going to walk in and browse the category of interest. And they're not necessarily going to go down a whole huge biography section and look for things. They will go to certain, like military history, or things like that. So every store is different. They don't all do it the same. So trying to aim at a specific store, is kind of pitiful, because it's going to probably mess you up for some others.
But there's a fundamental difference there, similar to retail and wholesale. But the bookstore is buying a book based on where they're going to put it, where it fits.
Right.
A person who's going to buy a book looks at the book and says, that looks interesting, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe the cover art and whatever's on the spine of the book, because the books are all placed in there with just the spine showing,
Sure.
is probably going to be as important as genre.
Right.
And where it's in the bookstore, people will gravitate to the place where they find the books they like. And so it's two different ways of looking at the books.
Yeah. I was referring to Kalela, referring to the BIFAC being so bookstores will know where to put the book. And we categorize them. We make our own choices as buyers. We will look at it. We recognize right off that the main category is fiction, or the main category is biography. But we decide what that means in terms of the store. It's always in the store's position. It's always, where's the best place to put the book, so people looking for that kind of book will browse for it, because the store is huge. People don't have time to walk through the whole store and look for, what they think looks pretty or attractive, or, any of that. Yeah, especially nowadays. So frequently you've got two kinds of customers, usually, broadly. You've got customers who just want to kind of spend some time at the store and browse because they enjoy it. And you've got customers who come in knowing what book they want, and they want to ask the staff person, where is it located? We look it up in the computer and we tell them. And
for the first kind of customer, you stand in front of the bookshelf, and medieval romance is going to be within view of
all through romance. There's no medieval. So if it's a large section, they're going to have to walk down the entire romance section and look at all the books to discover one that fits the medieval. What people usually have to do is, if they're particular, and if they don't know what the book is they're looking for, is they will pull a book off the shelf and just kind of read what it's about on the back. And they'll say, I'm not interested in that, put it back. And another one they will pull, that's pretty neat. Or they will ask staff. Frequently, customers will ask staff, what would you recommend that we get? And that's where you get the difference between online stuff and going to a store where there's staff that can help you, because that's what they do. They say, well, what do you like to read? And they will say, well, I like to read books about women struggling in the Old West or what have you and stuff. And the staff person, they go, you know, I'm not that much into that, but so and so is. Let's go ask them. And they go and say, you know, and that staff person may say, oh God, yeah, I've got a book for you. This is great. This will grab me. I really like this. And they take them over to it, hand it to them, and they look at it and they go, perfect. See? So that's why bookstore people get paid the big bucks. And I can I'm laughing right. And most staffers love to share their knowledge about different books and things they've discovered that they really like. And a lot of stuff gets reviewed. We put it online on our website, and you know. But again, it's one of those things where there is no one answer to any of this. It's all true. It all happens. And there are people who will argue and fight to the death for their pet idea. And, you know, I don't care to do that with mine because I know I don't control any of this. It's just the way things are, and it's not always the same. So.
Yeah, each book is unique, so it's hard to really place them because if they're all different, it's kind of hard to put a lot of stuff together.
Yeah, you can't. If you know, if you've got what would we have? If you've got 2,000, 3,000 fiction books on the shelf in that section, okay, how are you going to tell them apart? How are you going to? I mean, people are going to browse by author. They know an author's name that they like. They'll go look for that because they're alphabetical by author. So they'll go look for that author. And, oh, yay, she's got a new one out, blah, blah, blah. But if it's a large enough subgenre, like mystery has its own section, horror has its own shelving, romance has its own section. So there's certain categories like that. But they're going to have several hundred books in, you know, and so the person is still going to be looking at all these books. It never gets broken down beyond those levels. It's never broken to the point of this is about Westerns, like you were talking about, writing about Jerry, about a black person, black cowboy. Okay, there's never going to be anything that will fit that category per se. So in the end, you have to decide whether you want to put it in Westerns or historical fiction, you know, or where you think it'll fit. Of course, historical fiction isn't its own section, so you're kind of out of luck there. But I would think Western is going to be your primary one, and the Western section may, given the favorite topic of a given bookstore, that section may be small or it may be large. Again, you get bookstores are all different. They're different sizes. Some are very small, some are very big, and they shelve things or buy things based on their personal belief that this is for my customers who like this. I serve this kind of customer. And so really it's I don't want to say it's a crapshoot, but it really behooves anyone who wants to aim at a particular audience that they study a lot, figure out just exactly what niche should my book be in. And we're running way over. We're 8:15, so.
Yeah, I'm starting to smell chicken and mashed potatoes, so it's about time to go.
Uh-oh, I had that yesterday, so I'm jealous. Well, Steve just leaned over and went, he was gone. There he's back. Okay, well,
Right.
thanks for being here. And if you didn't get a chance to, you know, remember that at the bottom of the screen on the chat, you have the chat visible, that long thing with all the messages. At the bottom left, there should be 3 dots. You click on that, it'll say save chat is the selection you can make. And that will save that whole chat to your computer.
Okay.
Anybody see that? So that gives you all of this information already. You
Yep.
don't have to, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Because I'm recording, the whole chat will show up for me, so I don't have to worry about it. But anybody that wants to say, there's some good links on here. Okay. Well, folks, thank you, and I appreciate your support. I appreciate you coming. I hope you got something out of this, and we're able to, at least chip or two. And we will have next month, Kaleila's going to give us a presentation about author newsletters and how important they are for your marketing and building a following. So they'll want to buy your book when it comes out. So I'm really looking forward to that, Kaleila, because I'm tired of listening to myself. So just soon
Well,
have
glad I can help.
Yeah, I'm glad you can too. And then Frank's going to come in September, unless something goes wrong. He will be here with writing police procedurals, getting it right. Okay. He's going to talk about a different kind of fact checking and accuracy. So that should be
Thank you, Linda.
Sure. Paul?
Can you think of put in mind a person with his first published book
Mhm.
is going to be treating a newsletter different from somebody who's writing his or publishing his 13th. And the devil is in the details when you're starting out. And so it might be interesting to hear her talk about how do you kickstart it?
She's got a major presentation to make, so I think that she's going to cover just about everything we need to hear. But thanks for bringing it up, Paul. Means you're going to be here front and center, right?
Yeah, we'll try to be.
Okay.
This is an odd time for me. So
Well, I'm sorry.
no, it's just that if we're going to go out on Tuesdays, we're usually out to about 6:30, and then we have dinner. And I remember, oh, it's 6:20. I better or 7:20. I better get online.
Well, good job. I'm going to make fun of you now. Good job. This isn't Tuesday. This is a Wednesday. So if you go out on Tuesday, it'll be fine. You won't have a problem. Thanks for laughing.
Well, I'm out here in the boondocks, and I don't even get a newspaper, so I can't tell what day it is by how big the newspaper is.
Yeah. Well, that's why I've had different people say, what day is it? So I always try to put up there, Wednesday, July 19th, 7 p.m. Because you'd be surprised how many people, even though they see the invitation and all the info on there that says that, but they don't seem to notice it. That's just human nature. And I've learned to just be there, okay? So not to worry.
Yeah, well, I retired and it's harder to keep track of the days sometimes after you work.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Well, think about me. I've got the events coming and going right and left, and I've got to. Like
Well,
the other night, there was something or the other day, there was something I think started at 2 or something, and I looked up and it was 2. I went, oh my God! I was totally a half hour earlier. I knew it, but by the time it hit, I had totally spaced. So I zipped in there real quick, and people were nice and good to me about that. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.